Calling Deputy Owen Murphy.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. I don't know if I can sum up 18 months of participation on a banking inquiry in 10 minutes, but I'll try and add to what the members have already said. I do want to pay a huge amount of thanks to Ciarán Lynch and for the huge effort he had to put in with this inquiry personally. I mean, I think it's fair to say that when the public hearings began, we as members had to take a step back from the process on the other side with the investigative team to focus on the public sessions. Ciarán Lynch, of course, had to focus on the public sessions. We had to continue to run the back room. And so he had this huge task that maybe people who were just tuning in and watching on TV or reading in the papers mightn't have been aware of all that extra work that was going on in the background every other day that the inquiry wasn't sitting. And Ciarán Lynch carried that burden on his shoulders admirably. I'd also like to thank the Secretariat staff and the legal investigators and the investigators. I got to know some of them quite well in the course of the report preparation period at the end, while I was based in the inquiry offices for a brief period of time, and they were a great team to work with. I'd also like to thank my own parliamentary assistant for the banking inquiry, Darren McGreal, as well as my office, who did have to help as well. I mean, it was a huge work done by everyone, and as well, of course, my colleagues on the inquiry for everything that they did, and I suppose for putting up with me as well as a colleague. I might have been a bit schizophrenic in some of the private meetings, you know, depending on my mood and where I thought we were going, but it was great to work with everyone right up to the end, you know. And I've got some very nice memories from those moments where we weren't in public session and we were together as colleagues and people working together on a big project, and I'm glad I have them. I'd also like to thank my constituents for their patience for the last 18 months and allowing me to do this work and be a parliamentarian. I do very much appreciate that. You know, I wanted to be on this inquiry. This inquiry, what happened, is part of the reason why I came home and got involved in politics. So I did seek to be on it when I was in the Public Accounts Committee, and myself and Deputy Kieran O'Donnell prepared the report on how one might conduct an inquiry. And I was privileged to be appointed to it by the Taoiseach, and I'd like to thank him for that as well. I think I was appointed to the inquiry at a point in time where I was maybe having questions about the effectiveness of the Oireachtas. I think people have those questions. And it certainly restored my faith in this chamber, in the people elected to it, and in the work that we have to do. And I got a huge amount of professional development from it. And just to take up a point of Deputy McGrath's, because I was of a similar view about an Evanston-style inquiry until we started this work. And I actually think that the Oireachtas had to do this. Our elected representatives had to do this work. And if we hadn't have, I think it might have been an abdication of our responsibilities and a loss. And it was political at times, it was, but that was minimised. And, you know, we weren't there to do a piece of work for the media, to land the blow, as they always said to us afterwards privately. You didn't lay a hand on that witness. That's not why we were there. Or as some members of the public might say, no one's going to jail. Well, we weren't there to replace the courts either. We were there as a group of parliamentarians to go off and do a serious piece of work from the key people involved through our crisis period to get their testimony, their evidence on the record. Let others judge. That's what we were there to do, and I think we did that away from the faux theatrics we sometimes see in this chamber. And I have no doubt about the ability of each of the members in the public sessions to leave their party jerseys at the door and to do the work professionally. And good work was done, good questions were asked, and good evidence is there for people who want to take the time with the transcripts. And just on that point, in terms of maybe personal recommendation or personal viewpoint for the future of inquiries, we should always focus our efforts on the public sessions. We should always focus our efforts on compelling the right witnesses, collecting documentation, examining and cross-examining it. I think that should always, if it's a future inquiry, that should be its focus. Of course, there must be a report, but that report should be approached as an addition to that work, not as an attempt at a summation. And I think that's, if we're being honest with ourselves, that's where we started to encounter some difficulties. Once we finished the public sessions, we went off to try and summarise it all, and it was too much. We had taken in more witnesses than we intended to. We had hundreds of hours of evidence. We had 500,000 pages of documentation. You could never in 400 pages do all that work justice. So a future inquiry, I think, should see that its report writing duties as an addition rather than an attempt at a summation, particularly given the legal constraints that we face, and the legal constraints that come from the Constitution. It's not a lack of will on the part of this Parliament to give more powers to an inquiry or make it more effective. It's the Constitution that determines that, and we have to be absolutely cognizant of that. So I think that's something to bear in mind. The report is published, and I think just to acknowledge Senator Susan O'Keefe's work in getting that report published. It wouldn't have happened. I mean, everyone played a role in the final weeks, and a heroic effort was made. But Senator Susan O'Keefe, in my view, got this over the line. I'd like to congratulate her and thank her for that. The report is now published across 3 volumes, and it's a fine report. And as Senator Sean Barrett said yesterday at a press conference, the future PhDs are going to come from the work that we've collected, and I hope so, because it won't be academics for academics' sake. This will be an opportunity for people to really drill down outside of the constraints of a Dáil term or anything else, and draw up even more lessons, more recommendations, more truths that we need to face and face openly and honestly. The failings of the banks was massive. And I really wonder now, after all the work we've done, have they learnt their lesson at all? Particularly when I see some of the advertisements at the moment. And that's a worrying development. Because as Chairman Kieran Lynch said, this idea that this time it's different, that's one of the greatest failings of human nature, I think, that we always think that this time it's different, this time it's special, and then we make the same mistakes again. It's a failure of imagination, I think, as a playwright put it. That was the problem in the crisis, the failure to comprehend what might actually be happening. So when dissenting voices raised themselves up, they were ushered away. We don't want to hear it. We couldn't imagine the kind of catastrophe that was coming. And that continued through the crisis. It continued through trying to assess the real damage in the bank's portfolios, trying to assess likelihood of it needing a bailout, all of these things, the fiscal adjustment required, what the interest rates should be, burden sharing, in every area, I think. And perhaps when we look at things like the banking behaviour today, we can see it continuing. And that's a real worry that I have. And to come back now to what Deputy McGrath said, in terms of the recommendations, there aren't as many as we would have liked, but again, the constraints of the report. But this report can't sit on a shelf. Too much time and money and resources were invested in it. There are good recommendations there. They might not be all the recommendations we need, but they are good, and they should be implemented. And that will fall to the next government, whoever that might be, to do so. And if I am re-elected to this House and I have the opportunity to serve again, it will be a bugbear of mine. A regular question to all of the officials and all of the authorities: what have you done with the recommendations and the findings of the Banking Inquiry report? And there's some key things in there, like the enforcement division of the central bank coming into the Oireachtas committee. Absolutely has to happen. Let's make the Fiscal Advisory Council responsible to the Oireachtas, directly responsible. Let's get independent oversight of the banking function of the Department of Finance. Let's have a review of NAMA when its work is done. Let's look at how the NTMA operates and what powers the minister should or should not have over it. All of these things have to be examined. And this inquiry now gives us that impetus to do so. And I hope it does have that impetus, and that does carry through for the next government and the next administration and every other TD that comes in here. As we now start to plan for the future, as the economy has recovered, and we look ahead, the duty will fall to the 158 people elected here to keep an eye, to pay that scrutiny and that attention to detail that was not paid in the past. And a big part of what I wanted to do in the inquiry was to examine the role of the Oireachtas in how the structure, the system, might have failed to be able to be an adequate brake or a check and balance on government behaviour. It's a lot of the work that I've done here to date. And we need to give space to our parliamentarians to look at legislation. We need to give them that impetus. We need to give them that motivation to do so, to ask the difficult questions, to stay down in the committee the long hours, to chase up the leads and to go into detail. Right now, our system doesn't give us that opportunity. There are many different recommendations out there across the parties as to how we can improve this Parliament to make sure that the future Finance Committee, that the future Independent Budget Oversight Office, the future Budget Scrutiny Committee and so forth can really hold any future government to the fire on those key details in the way that the past government had a disregard, I think, for this Parliament. And again, it was part of the reason why I came in here, but I don't want to move into the political space at all, so I'm not going to go there. But these are lessons that need to be taken into the future for the next Dáil. And just in the final minute that I have, Ceann Comhairle, there are parts in this report, there are parts in the inquiry that we weren't able to tie together like we may have liked to have. Other people may be able to do that. As a committee, we were bound by very specific rules. But it was always curious, I thought, about the distance that was placed between officialdom and the NTMA when it came to key moments in this crisis. NTMA wasn't placing deposits with Anglo. And was made to. The NTMA wasn't on the domestic standing group in the initial stages. The NTMA wasn't, it seems, aware fully of the approach in relation to the systemic crisis when it emerged as to what the government intended to do. The NTMA weren't involved in the negotiations and the burden sharing at the 11th hour. The NTMA was making calculations as to what might be achieved on burden sharing that seemed to be at odds with what the Department of Finance was pursuing. at the end of 2010, beginning of 2011. And that stood out for me as something of interest, because that institution is important. It is the nation's bankers, and they have acquitted themselves excellently through the crisis and through our getting back into the bond markets and getting ourselves back on our feet. And we can't let any kind of institutional bias that may exist or may have existed continue if there is one. Thank you.